Hello everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. I grew up with my mom and dad in Arizona, in a city called Chandler. I've always liked sports, and I'm happy to see how, over time, women's sports in schools have improved a lot. For almost all my school years, I played volleyball, although lately I also started getting interested in soccer. My dad loved the idea, maybe because he had always hoped I would share his passion for sports. I was more of a rough-around-the-edges girl, kind of a tomboy, not too feminine. When I started playing soccer, he began supporting me more, and that brought us a lot closer. Still, I kept enjoying afternoon shopping with my mom. We used to go together to look for clothes, and as I got older, we started having our self-care days, spa, makeup, and talks. Overall, we were a very close family. My mom had her own real estate agency that covered almost the entire state of Arizona, and my dad worked as an accountant for a big local company. He also worked from home 2 days a week. For more than a year, Dad had been saying he wanted us to move out of state. When they asked me how I felt about the idea, I told them I didn't really mind. I didn't have many close friends, so I didn't feel very attached to the place. I thought it could be an exciting change for all of us. At that time, I was 18 years old and still didn't know clearly what I wanted to do with my professional future, so I thought that moving could give me new opportunities. Another recent thing was that I had broken up with my boyfriend a month earlier. There was no cheating. We just didn't feel the same anymore. We stayed friends, but the relationship had cooled off. I joked that maybe, in the new place, I would find new friends, or even a new boyfriend. After several months of conversations about the move, Dad said, "I've been looking at some properties in California, especially in San Diego." It seemed like the decision was leaning towards San Diego, and it sounded like a good option to me. 2 weeks after that conversation, my parents took advantage of a long weekend to take a trip. That was when I realized it would be my first time home alone. As soon as they left, I went downtown to buy clothes. I got back around 3:30 in the afternoon. Since I had already eaten out, I put away my new clothes and decided to take a swim in the backyard pool. While I floated relaxed in the water, I heard my phone ring on the pool deck. It was my dad. He called to remind me of something. He said, "Today is October 31st, Halloween." He told me about how we used to dress up and go around the neighborhood trick-or-treating when I was a kid. I remembered it fondly, but I replied that I had stopped doing that when I was 15. It was true. Since then, Mom and I were the ones who stayed home to hand out candy and chocolate to the little kids who knocked on the door. Dad continued, "Since you're home alone and we won't be there, you'll have to take care of the kids tonight. Find something to hand out, maybe candy or treats. Mom wants me to remind you there are some things in the cabinet above the refrigerator. Oh, and don't forget to put the battery-powered pumpkin that's in the garage by the front door. Make sure you turn it on, okay?" I answered, laughing. "Yes, Dad, relax. I'll handle the zombies and werewolves tonight." We joked a little, and then I went to take a shower and get dressed. When I finished, I opened my closet and found my old horror makeup kit. I painted my face white and drew skull features. I put on a black blouse and black pants. I put a pizza in the oven for dinner before the kids started arriving. Then I remembered what my dad had said about the glowing pumpkin. It had eyes that lit up, and he always placed it next to the front door, near the palm tree. I went to the garage to look for it. After about 10 minutes of searching, I saw it on one of the highest shelves. Since I couldn't reach, I dragged over a wooden crate and placed it beside the shelf. I climbed on top, but even then I still couldn't quite reach. So I stood on my tiptoes and leaned forward until I finally grabbed it. I don't clearly remember how I lost my balance, but but suddenly I fell and hit my head as I went down. Everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I was on the floor. I felt stupid, dazed and dizzy. I used the shelves to pull myself up. When I looked at my watch, I noticed I had been unconscious for about 30 minutes, which worried me. Suddenly I heard the doorbell and the voices of kids yelling, "Trick or treat." I left the garage and went into the kitchen through the side door. Before opening the door, I grabbed some candy and went to the entryway. When I opened it, I saw 4 kids about 10 years old. 3 were boys dressed as zombies, with red eyes, gray paint and torn shirts. The 4th was a girl dressed as a vampire, with spectacular makeup and white fangs. One of the boys said to me, "I like your skeleton makeup with fake blood." I replied, "What?" Then I noticed I had blood on my fingertips. I hadn't used blood in my makeup. I didn't try to explain. I just put candy into their bags. They thanked me, wished me a happy Halloween, and walked away down the path. I closed the door and left more bags of candy on the entry table for the next group. Then I sat in the living room, still with a headache. I closed my eyes for a moment, but a loud pounding on the door woke me up. It was 8:30 at night. I must have fallen asleep for almost an hour. It surprised me, because nobody knocks when there's a doorbell. However, the pounding happened again 3 times, each time louder. As I got closer, a feeling of fear began to spread through me. Icy air seeped in from under the door and sent a shiver up my spine, raising goosebumps on my skin. I stopped just as they knocked again, with a sharp sound that echoed through the hallway. I looked through the people. All I saw was a tall figure dressed completely in black, with a hood covering their face. I thought it must be a very big guy, or maybe an adult trying to scare people. I decided not to open the door, but just when I turned to walk away, something strange happened. My right hand moved on its own, as if it didn't belong to me. It turned the lock and opened the door before I could stop it. Standing in front of me was that hooded figure, wearing a long robe and giving off a disgusting smell that made me hold my breath. I tried to speak, but I barely managed to whisper. Suddenly I felt an extremely clear awareness of my body, like I was trapped in a nightmare where I couldn't move. Deep down I knew none of it was real, and then everything went dark again. I don't know how long I stayed unconscious, but when I opened my eyes, I found myself lying on the living room sofa. The first thing I saw were my parents' worried faces leaning over me. My mom was holding an ice pack to my head, and there was a bandage around the wound. That was when I understood that all of it, the hit, the blackout, the strange vision, had happened while I was alone. Mom explained that when they got home, they found me lying on the garage floor. Apparently, I hadn't cleaned the wound well after I fell, and that had made the injury worse. Dad, frowning, said they hadn't wasted a second and had taken me to the hospital for tests. The doctors confirmed that I had a fairly severe concussion, though luckily without serious consequences. I hadn't broken anything or suffered internal damage. I just had to rest and stay under observation for a few days. Even so, what disturbed me most wasn't the pain, but how real what I had experienced felt. Everything I remembered, the hooded figure, the cold that slipped under the door, the hand that moved without my control, felt like something out of a nightmare, but to me it had been completely tangible. While I was on the hospital bed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Had it been a dream caused by the blow to my head, or something else? The truth is, I had never experienced anything so vivid. I could remember the smell, the sounds, even the texture of the doorknob under my fingers. That night when we came back home, my parents insisted I rest in my room. Mom placed a dim lamp next to the bed in case I needed light, and Dad checked the garage to make sure everything was in order. I could barely fall asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that tall figure in black, motionless in front of me. The next day, the doctor explained that hard blows to the head can cause temporary hallucinations or extremely realistic dreams. That explanation made sense, but deep down, something inside me wasn't convinced. Everything I felt that night was so authentic. The fear, the cold, the sound of those knocks on the door. It was as if my mind had gotten stuck between reality and a dream I couldn't wake up from. Sometimes when October arrives and Halloween gets close, I catch myself looking at the front door, half expecting to hear those 3 dull knocks again. And even though I try to convince myself it was all the result of the fall, a part of me still feels that something, or someone, really was there that night. Story 2. I had spent the entire day at a soccer tournament. My younger brother played on one of the teams, and honestly, I had been dragged into going. I was 16 at the time, and we lived in the northeast of Great Britain. It was pouring rain, like the entire sky was emptying itself over us. I was standing on the edge of the field, soaked, wondering what I was doing with my life. At that age, I had started thinking a lot more about everything, and to be honest, I wasn't interested at all in supporting my brother. I felt a little guilty admitting it, but I didn't care about soccer in the slightest, not even a little. That night when we got home, my brother smelled like mud and damp, and since he was always looking for ways to mess with me, he thought it was hilarious to rub his muddy pants against my freshly washed jeans. When we arrived, Mom and Dad said they were going out that night. My brother, meanwhile, already had plans to spend the night at a friend's house, his teammate and almost like his brother. They had sleepovers almost every weekend. Then Dad turned to me and said, "Well, unless you want to come with us, you can stay home alone." I didn't mind the idea too much. I considered going with them, but I imagined it would feel like crashing their date and not fitting in there. So I chose to stay, even though I felt a little nervous about being alone. We lived on the outskirts of town. A little over half a mile away lived my aunt and uncle, and about another half-mile farther lived my grandmother. My grandfather had died when I was 8, so she lived alone, already 84 years old. We took very good care of her. Mom and I went almost every afternoon to make her dinner and make sure she was okay. I remember it was a Friday night and we had just gotten back from the game. I felt relieved to finally be home. I went upstairs to take a shower, wondering why my parents had decided to leave me alone. When I came out of the bathroom, I noticed there was no one there anymore. Mom and Dad had left without even saying goodbye. I assumed they had gone in a hurry to drop my brother off at his friend's house, but even so, it seemed a little strange to me. Normally, the house was always full of noise. My little brother could be truly unbearable. Believe me, if he was in the same building, you knew it. Even when he slept, he snored louder than a truck on the highway. I dried my hair, put on my pajamas, and went down to the kitchen to find something for dinner. I'll be honest, I was never good at cooking. Mom was still making my food when I was 16 or 17. It wasn't until I turned 18 and went to college that I started making my own meals. That night I threw something together, though I don't remember exactly what. Maybe a sandwich with chips or eggs with baked beans. Something simple. I turned on the TV and relaxed on the couch. My parents hadn't said what time they'd be back, but I figured they'd return before 11. I mean, what restaurants are open past midnight? Besides, they were already in their 40s and definitely weren't the type to go dancing or clubbing. When I finished eating, I left the plates, utensils and bowls in the sink, turned on the faucet and added a little soap to let them soak. Then I flopped back onto the couch, determined to avoid chores as much as possible. About 20 minutes passed, when suddenly the landline phone next to me rang. I swear I nearly had a heart attack. That phone never rang in my house. I'm not exaggerating. My parents didn't have many friends, and all my friends and my brothers called us on our cell phones, never on the landline. That's why, when the house phone rang, it was basically a family event. It was around 8 at night. I just stared at the phone, wondering who the hell could be calling. I ignored the first call. I let it go to voicemail. It was one of those phones that lets you listen to the message live while the person is speaking. But the only thing you could hear was breathing. Slow, heavy breathing, and nothing else. Not a single word. I swear a chill ran through me from the back of my neck all the way down to my feet. Even though I knew I was safe in the house, I couldn't help feeling afraid. The breathing went on for several seconds, maybe a full minute, and then the call ended. Barely 60 seconds later, the phone rang again. I didn't answer. This time, along with the breathing, I could hear little growls, low sounds, almost guttural. It was horrible. When they finally hung up, the silence came back, and I was frozen on the couch with my heart pounding. That was when my cell phone started vibrating in my pajama pocket. I pulled it out immediately and saw it was my mom. I answered, and her voice sounded shaken, agitated, almost out of breath. "Ella, go to Grandma's house right now. The ambulance is on the way." I felt my blood turn to ice. I hung up, threw on my sneakers as fast as I could, and ran out into the rain. It took me about 15 or 20 minutes to get there, soaked, exhausted, with my heart in my throat. When I finally arrived, an ambulance was already parked in front of the house. My grandmother had suffered a stroke. They found her lying on the kitchen floor. She couldn't move, but she had managed to drag herself far enough to reach the phone. I fell apart. A wave of panic, fear, and guilt hit me for not answering the house phone earlier. Luckily, she survived. But the whole experience was as terrifying as it was frustrating. Even today, when I think about those calls and the breathing I heard, my stomach turns, and I can't help wondering whether it was pure coincidence, or whether somehow it was her trying to ask for help. Story 3. I often spend a lot of time home alone. My family is always busy with work or school, so I'm the only one who keeps a stable routine when I get back from work. Because of that, it isn't unusual for me to be alone for several hours at a time. That particular night, my parents were working and my sister had gone to her boyfriend's house. I was on the living room couch downstairs, playing some game on my phone to kill time until everyone got back. Our cat was sleeping in another room, and even the hum of the air conditioner had stopped. Suddenly, I heard something moving near the front porch. At first, I didn't pay much attention. The neighborhood kids often play too close to our yard, and sometimes they throw things that end up landing in our patio. There was a window facing the exact area the noise was coming from, but we always keep the curtains closed. Besides, there's a big piece of furniture in front of that window that blocks almost the entire view, so moving the curtains wouldn't have helped much anyway. I figured it was just the usual noise from the neighbors, but then I realized the sound wasn't moving. If it had been one of those kids, they would have picked up their ball and run back home. Then I remembered the time. It was around 9 at night. By then, the kids should have already been asleep. As soon as I had that thought, the noise came again. This time it was moving slowly, circling the house and getting closer, right toward the wall I was leaning against. The sound of its footsteps was heavy, steady, like long strides. I could hear the stones on the path crunching under its feet. In that moment, I knew it couldn't be a child. I tried to calm myself by thinking maybe it was my mom or dad. Maybe they had gotten home early and were waiting for me to open the door for them. But then I saw something that made me dismiss that idea immediately. A forehead appearing in the window directly above me. Our house is built on a slight slope, so to reach that window you have to stand on a strip of grass and brace yourself against the corner of the wall to keep your balance. However, I hadn't heard footsteps on the dirt or the typical sound of the wall creaking when someone leans on it. That could only mean that whoever it was still standing on the gravel path. To be able to see their forehead from there, that person had to be at least 7 feet tall, around 6 feet 10 inches. In that instant, I felt a chill. I understood it wasn't anyone I knew. Fear paralyzed me, and I started to feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I pressed myself hard into the couch, trying to hide as well as I could. It seemed to work, or at least that's what I thought. The figure showed no sign that it had seen me, and the only thing I could make out was that dark forehead. I couldn't see hair or color. Nothing. In fact, it was as if it had no hair at all. Only a few seconds passed, though they felt endless to me. And then I heard it start moving again, walking along the side of the house toward the back porch. In that moment, I knew that if it got there, it would be able to see me clearly through the big living room window. I rushed out of the living room and ran into the kitchen. I felt a little safer there. Even if that thing knew there was a window in the back, it would have to look through the wooden lattice that covers that side of the porch, right behind a big swing. I hid behind the thin semi-transparent curtains near the small bathroom that's between the kitchen and the living room. I waited in silence. Then I heard the heavy footsteps climb up onto the back porch and stop. I stayed perfectly still, holding my breath. The figure began pacing back and forth on the porch. I could clearly hear the wooden floor creaking under its weight. Suddenly, the doorknob to the door that connects to the laundry room began to move. It tried to open it. Luckily, we always keep that door locked because we almost never use it. My fear grew even more when all of a sudden, I stopped hearing any sound. There were no more footsteps, no creaking wood, no scraping gravel. It was as if it had vanished. And that was worse, because if it was no longer on the porch, it could be anywhere in the yard, looking through any of the many windows that looked directly into the inside of the house. The stairs to the second floor were right beside me. I went up quickly, trying not to make noise, and waited outside my sister's bedroom. Several minutes passed in total silence. Carefully, I moved toward the hallway window. The blinds were completely closed, but I managed to lift one corner to peek out. That's when fear froze me completely. That thing was right below me in the yard, holding the basement door wide open. It was staring at the wall, motionless. It had no visible clothing. Its shape was strange, unnatural. It looked sturdy, but I could see bones protruding under tight, almost translucent skin. And it didn't have a single trace of hair. It was completely hairless. I watched it reach its hand toward the basement door one more time, and I realized that, at least for now, it hadn't seen me. I backed away slowly and slid down the hallway until I reached my parents' bedroom. About 20 minutes later, my mother got home. I didn't say anything. I never told her or anyone else in my family, and I never saw that thing again. Sometimes I think I was lucky not to have seen it more clearly. Whatever it was, person, creature, or something I can't name, I just hope it stays far away from me. Because home is supposed to be the place where you should feel safest. But that night, I didn't feel safe at all. Story 4. Some people might not believe what I'm about to tell, and that's fine. But I ask you to give me a chance before deciding not to believe it. This happened when I slept over at a friend's house in New Zealand. We used to be very close, although over time we drifted apart a bit because we started going to different schools. Back then we were about 11 or 12 years old. We were inseparable, best friends, and we always enjoyed hanging out together. One weekend we decided to have a sleepover at her house. The house was small. One story in the living room, dining room, and kitchen were all connected in one big open space. The bedrooms were at the other end of the house. I packed my things and went to sleep there. I remember it must have been late November or early December in the southern hemisphere, so don't get confused about the seasons. Before the sun went down, my friend and I took a walk to the beach, which was pretty close to our school. As we walked along a narrow path surrounded by bushes, I had the feeling that someone was following us. I mentioned it to my friend, but she dismissed it completely. She told me it was just my imagination. I tried to forget it, although that feeling stayed with me the whole way back. When we got back to her house, we had dinner with her family. At first I felt a little uncomfortable, but then the conversation started flowing and we all ended up having a good time. Then we gathered blankets and pillows to build a kind of fort in the living room where we planned to sleep. By then the sun had completely set. It was around 9 at night. The rest of her family had already gone to bed, including her little sister, who shared a bed with their parents. We finished building our little shelter, and even though our feet stuck out from one end, we were thrilled with how it turned out. I don't clearly remember the next 5 hours. I think her parents told us to keep it down a couple of times. I usually stayed up late, so I was really excited. But then things took an unexpected turn. While we were talking about our fort, something caught my attention. Through the window, I saw a large, bulky figure standing there, upright and imposing. My friend didn't have blinds on the windows, so we could see outside, though not very clearly. The street light was a bit far away, and the only light that illuminated anything was the full moon, hanging over the houses and letting its silvery glow come through the glass. Both of us, driven by childish curiosity, slowly moved closer to the window to see better. It was almost 7 feet tall, just a few inches below the top of the window frame. Its body was muscular, and it had a wolf-like snout. Its ears pointed upward, and its silhouette looked like a very strong man's, but its entire body was covered in thick fur. Its eyes glowed with a reddish shine, although the moon's reflection on the glass made them look white. Its expression was a mix between a snarl and a grimace. Maybe it was just baring its teeth, but those teeth were incredibly white, and the moonlight made them gleam. They were sharp, pointed like a dog's. The moon lit up the sky beautifully, but neither my friend nor I dared to turn on the lights. Then I remembered I had left a watch in the kitchen, and I ran to check the time. It was so dark that I had to turn on a dim lamp, one of those that gives off a warm orange glow. My friend ran after me, and then we went back to the living room. We tried turning on the main living room light, but it only made things worse. The reflection on the glass kept us from seeing outside, so we turned it off right away. The faint light from the kitchen spilled into the living room, dimly illuminating the creature and maybe allowing it to see us. Then both my friend and I saw it turn its head toward me. In that instant, my friend panicked, and when I saw her, I finally felt the fear I had been holding back until then. I ran toward her, away from the window and closer to the couch and the TV. We decided to hide inside the fort we had built and try to sleep, even though we knew it would be impossible. The next morning, when the first rays of sunlight filled the living room, we looked at each other without saying a word and whispered about what had happened. We didn't want to wake anyone up or sound like we were making up a story. When the room filled with light, we got up and went together to the window. Outside there was nothing, no footprints, no sign that something that big had been there. We didn't tell anyone what we saw, not her parents, not my friends, not even my grandmother, even though she knows a lot about this kind of thing. We simply didn't have a logical explanation, and we knew it would sound ridiculous. Sometimes I still wonder about it. What was that? The only possibilities I can come up with are a shapeshifter, a werewolf, or maybe a skinwalker. But honestly, I have no idea what it was. To this day, I'm still baffled, and left with that same feeling of awe and fear. It was, without a doubt, one of the strangest and most terrifying nights of my life. Story 5. A while ago, I helped my friend John move houses. It wasn't easy at all, since it was just the two of us carrying all the weight. We spent hours moving boxes and furniture back and forth. When we were finally about to finish, it was already dark out, and we were both completely exhausted. Luckily, John had an extra bed in the basement. He told me I could stay the night down there, and that the next day we'd finish up the last things. I accepted without hesitation. I was so tired I didn't have the energy to drive back home. Besides, there were still a few items left to move. The basement bed turned out to be pretty comfortable, so I lay down, and within minutes, I almost fell asleep. That was when I started hearing some strange noises. It sounded like something was moving around in the basement, but I couldn't tell exactly where the sounds were coming from. It was an uncomfortable feeling, even though I tried to ignore it. The noises kept going at irregular intervals. I figured it was probably mice or some small animal, which grossed me out a little, but I was so worn out that I eventually fell asleep anyway. The next morning I went upstairs to the main floor. John was already awake and asked me how my night in the basement had been. I told him it had been fine, although I mentioned the noises I'd heard. His expression changed immediately. He looked surprised and told me he had also heard weird sounds coming from the basement, but he had assumed it was me moving around down there. Then he added that he had even heard similar noises coming from another part of the house. We both got chills, but we tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was mice or something like that. We decided to keep going with the move and continue putting things away. While I was carrying a couple of boxes down to the basement, one of them fell. When I bent down to pick it up, I noticed something unusual. In a corner right under the stairs, there was a small handle sticking up from the floor, almost unnoticeable, like someone had tried to hide it. It was something you could only see if you were paying very close attention. I called John over to take a look. He came closer, stared at it with curiosity, and gently pulled on it. To our surprise, the floor lifted up, revealing an opening. Underneath was a small hidden room. It was narrow, but still big enough for someone to sleep in there. Inside, we found a sleeping bag and several empty water bottles scattered across the floor. There was no one inside at that moment, but it was obvious that someone had been living there. John and I just froze. We immediately understood that the noises we had heard during the night had probably been coming from that person. We carefully searched the whole house, checking every corner, but we didn't find anyone. Later, we told a few friends what had happened, describing the secret compartment and the things inside it. No one ever saw the person who had been there again. Whoever it was disappeared completely, leaving behind only that silent hiding place under the stairs, and an unsettling feeling that to this day hasn't faded from our memory. Story 6. When I was about 10 years old, I went to my friend Robert's house to hang out and sleep over. Robert and I were like two peas in a pod, inseparable. Sometimes he would sleep at my house, and other times I would stay at his. Normally, his dad would join us to play a little soccer or practice throwing in the backyard, but that time he was out of town on a business trip. So instead, we decided to spend the afternoon playing video games, like we almost always did. We were having a great time until Robert's mom came up to his room and told us it was time to go to sleep. We got ready quickly. Robert got into his bed and I settled into my sleeping bag on the floor. I fell asleep almost immediately, but later, at some point in the night, I woke up feeling a little dazed. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something that made me frown. A dark figure was standing in the hallway right outside Robert's bedroom. At first, I wasn't alarmed. I thought it was his dad, maybe back earlier than expected. That thought calmed me down, and I closed my eyes again, falling back asleep. The next morning, we got up and ate cereal for breakfast. During our conversation, Robert mentioned that his dad would be coming back that same day. In that instant, I remembered everything. The silhouette in the hallway, the man standing still, watching us from the darkness. And that's when I realized it couldn't have been his dad, because he still hadn't returned yet. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had dreamed it, but deep down I knew what I had seen was real. So I told Robert. He looked shocked, his eyes wide open. I couldn't tell if he fully believed me, but he agreed that we should check the house just in case. We went from room to room, checking whether any window or door was open. Finally, we got to the basement where his family had a guest bedroom. When we opened the door, the air felt heavy. The room was a mess. Sheets tossed around, trash on the floor, and several things out of place. Robert froze. He told me the last time he had seen that room, it had been perfectly clean. He also said they almost never used it, and they normally kept the door closed. Suddenly, I saw him go pale. Without saying a word, he ran upstairs to get his mom. She came down to the basement right away, looked over the room, and came back about a minute later with a tense expression. She told us she was going to call the police. A little while later, the officers arrived and searched the whole house. They didn't find anyone, but they discovered that a window in the basement bedroom, the one that faced outside, was open. We never found out whether the man had escaped before they arrived, or if he heard our voices and ran while we were checking the house. But everything pointed to the fact that he had been living there for several days without anyone realizing it. Story 7. I was really excited to spend the weekend with my school's soccer team at the sports field hostel. We had been looking forward to that trip for weeks, but when we finally arrived that night, something felt strange. The moment I walked through the door, an uneasy feeling came over me. I can't really explain it, but I felt like someone was watching me. I couldn't see anyone or hear anything out of the ordinary, but that feeling wouldn't go away. There wasn't much I could do about it, so I just set up my sleeping bag and then went out to meet up with my teammates. We went to the computer room to hang out and play some video games before going to sleep. Everything was fine until we started noticing weird things. In a small room next to ours, we could see shadows moving in a strange way, like something or someone was inside. I thought the guys were trying to mess with us, so I decided to go check it out for myself. I pushed the door open and went in. Then I saw it. One of the old statues of athletes that decorated the place was moving slowly, like it was alive. And suddenly it turned its head and looked directly at me. Fear froze me in place. I jumped backward and looked away immediately. I wanted to say something, but I stayed quiet. I was afraid my friends would make fun of me or think I was making it up, so I kept silent and pretended nothing had happened. Later, we all got ready to sleep. I wasn't very tired, so I chatted with the others for a while until everyone gradually went quiet. It was around midnight when I started feeling discomfort in my stomach. I got up and opened a window to get some fresh air. But when I looked outside, the feeling got worse. There was a strange man standing in the middle of the soccer field, watching us in complete silence. I thought I was hallucinating or that my eyes were tricking me in the dark. I tried to calm down, but then I saw the man move. I called one of my friends over who had also sat up, and I noticed his expression was exactly like mine, a mix of fear and confusion. That helped a little. At least I wasn't the only one seeing it. Even so, I couldn't sleep all night. I stayed awake, completely still, listening. At some point, I heard a strange voice coming from the other side of the window. A low, incomprehensible murmur that made my blood run cold. I didn't have the courage to look again. I stayed awake until sunrise, eyes wide open and my heart pounding in my chest. The next morning, we went out onto the field to play a little before breakfast. While we ran after the ball, I took the chance to ask my friend if he remembered what we had seen. To my surprise, he said yes. He had also seen the man and heard the same unsettling sounds. He admitted he wanted to talk about it last night, but he was afraid no one would believe him. Later, while we were exploring the area, we discovered that not far from the field there was an old cemetery. Ever since then, I haven't been able to stop thinking that everything we saw might be connected to that place. Maybe I'm wrong, but honestly, I can't find any other explanation. Story 8. This happened in Colorado in the late 1990s when I was a teenager during the winter. My family and I lived in an isolated cabin in the middle of the woods. And when I say isolated, I mean the nearest store and also the closest house were more than a 30-minute drive away. That night it was around 10:30, and since my dad worked nights, it was just my mother and me. We had just finished dinner, and she asked me to wash the dishes, so I started doing it. While I was waiting for the cold water from the faucet to warm up, I noticed the outdoor light suddenly turned off. When I looked toward the window, I thought I could make out something. A face right outside, staring straight at me. I grabbed a rag and wiped the fog off the glass to see better. In that moment, an extremely bright light shined directly into my face. It was so bright that I had to look away and squint. My eyes hurt from the force of the glare. Meanwhile, my mother had finished putting the remaining dishes in the sink, and that movement snapped me out of my shock. I stepped away from the window, my heart racing, and when she noticed my expression, she asked what was wrong. I told her what I had just seen, that someone was outside watching us and that they had pointed a flashlight at me. At first she didn't believe me. She thought I was joking or exaggerating. I insisted again and again, swearing it was true. I didn't understand how she hadn't seen the flash of light if it had been that strong. Maybe she had her back turned or was distracted, but the fact was she hadn't noticed it. Since she wasn't paying attention, she shrugged and went back to what she was doing. When I felt brave enough, I slowly went back to the window. I looked outside, and there was no one. Outside was completely dark and silent. I convinced myself they had already left. But just as I started to relax, the doorknob on the front door began shaking violently, like someone was trying to turn it to get in. My mother screamed, and we both grabbed the nearest kitchen knife, the first one we could find. The pounding got worse. The doorknob twisted again and again, and someone started pushing and kicking the door, trying to break it down. It was obvious they wanted to get inside no matter what. And then at the most desperate moment, we heard an engine in the driveway. My father had arrived. His boss had let him leave work early that night. That coincidence saved our lives. When my father's car pulled up in front of the cabin, the man, or the men, who had been trying to get in ran off into the woods. Dad got us into the car and drove us straight to the police station to file a report. A few weeks went by before the police called and told us to come identify some suspects. When I saw them, I had no doubt. It was them. The officers told us they had been arrested while trying to break into another nearby house. The worst part was what they found on them. They had a rope, a knife, and a pair of handcuffs. To this day, it makes me shudder to think about what they were planning to do. I don't want to imagine it. I'm just incredibly grateful my father got there in time. A few months later, we decided to move out of that cabin for good. My father, with help from a few friends, built us a new house closer to town. I lived there with them for about 6 years, until I moved with my girlfriend to the outskirts of the city. And even though the years have passed, I still, when the wind blows hard at night, can hear the echo of that doorknob turning. Story 9. When I was 12 years old, there was a boy at my school named David. One weekend, he surprised me by inviting me to spend the night at his house. We weren't close. We had talked a couple of times, but nothing more than that. He had only joined the school the year before, so we hadn't spent much time together. I told him I wasn't very sure, but he insisted so much that I eventually agreed. When I got home, I asked my mother for permission, and she said yes. She even offered to drive me to his house after school. It was my first time going to David's house, and it still felt strange that he had invited me, but I thought maybe it was a good opportunity to make a new friend. His house was pretty nice. It had a huge living room with a giant TV and an impressive video game collection. We played Mario Kart and Super Smash Bros. For a while, laughing the whole time. Even so, there was something about David that felt strange to me. He had a peculiar way of talking and moving, like he didn't quite fit in. His bedroom was full of weird stuff, comics, action figures, collectible dolls. I couldn't really say why, but I didn't feel completely comfortable there. When it was time to sleep, I spread out my sleeping bag on the floor of his room, which was pretty big for a kid's room. It took me a while to fall asleep, but eventually I did. I don't know how many hours passed before I woke up, drenched in sweat. I felt unbearably hot. When I tried to move, I realized my sleeping bag was completely zipped all the way up, and there was also another blanket covering my head. I struggled to free myself and felt relief when I finally got fresh air. Right away, I knew I hadn't put that blanket there. I looked around and noticed David was awake, watching me from his bed. I asked him if he had been the one who covered me up, but he denied it completely seriously. I knew he was lying. When I accused him again, his expression changed. His face turned red and he started yelling at me angrily. I got scared. I didn't know how to react, so I decided to stay quiet and try to go back to sleep, hoping the night would pass quickly. I figured the best thing would be to hold out until morning and then ask my mom to come pick me up. After a while, that felt endless. I managed to fall asleep again. When I woke up, it was already daytime. I sat up expecting to see David, but he wasn't in the room. I assumed he had gone to the bathroom or to eat breakfast, so I waited a few minutes. But then I urgently needed to use the bathroom, so I tried to open the door, and it wouldn't move. The knob turned, but the door was locked from the outside. That was the last straw for me. I pounded on the door several times, calling for David, but no one answered. I felt trapped, frustrated, and angrier by the second. Finally, I pulled out my phone and called my mom. I told her what was happening and asked her to come pick me up immediately. She agreed right away, which calmed me down a little. While I waited, I kept banging on the door and yelling his name, but there was no response. David lived in a big house, so I didn't think I was in real danger, but the situation felt more and more strange. After what felt like forever, David's mother opened the door. She looked surprised to find me in there and told me, in a slightly annoyed tone, that my mother had already arrived. I grabbed my things and left without saying a word. I never got to see David. Since it was Sunday, I spent the rest of the day quietly at home, playing video games and trying to forget the bad experience. But that night, while I was in my room, I heard my mother calling me from the hallway. "You've got a friend at the door." I went to see who it was, and there was David standing at the front entrance. His face was tense, his lips pressed tight. He looked angry. He walked up to me and in an aggressive tone asked why I had left his house without saying goodbye. I explained that he had locked me in his room and I didn't know where he was. But he denied everything. He accused me of being a bad friend and stormed off. I didn't think too much of it. I just went back to my room and kept playing. About 15 minutes later, a brutal crash startled me. A sharp, loud sound, glass breaking. I felt like my heart stopped. I looked toward the window and saw glass scattered all over the floor. My parents ran into my room when they heard the noise. I was unharmed, far from the glass, but my mother looked out and saw something chilling. David was running down the street, away from our house. My parents called his parents immediately. I could hear the shouting and the argument on the other end of the phone until they hung up. I never heard anything else about him after that. All I know is that he never showed up at school again. Story 10. I live in a very small town, the kind where everyone knows each other and most people get along. We're barely a tiny dot on the state map, almost invisible to the rest of the world. But honestly, I like living here. People are usually kind, always willing to help, or at least that's what I used to think. Over time, I realized this place wasn't as safe as I believed, especially for a 15-year-old girl like me. It was one of those suffocatingly hot days where even breathing feels difficult, and doing anything active seems impossible. So I had a better idea. have a sleepover with my best friend, who was already at my house. We packed our things and headed to her place. Right as we were about to leave, we heard the ice cream truck music. I smiled and told my friend we could get free ice cream, since the owners were friends of my family. The big white truck turned onto our street, and as always, kids ran toward it excitedly, lining up with coins in their hands. The clinking of coins and happy shouts filled the air. I waited for the little kids to buy their ice cream before we did. While I looked over the menu, I asked my friend what she wanted. We both made our choices, and when I looked up to order, I went cold. The man behind the window was not the usual one. I just stared at him with my mouth slightly open. I was about to say the regular owner's name, but the stranger cut me off. "They went on vacation and left me in charge," he said with a creepy smile. "So what do you want, sweetheart?" His tone gave me chills. He was in his 30s, tan skin, a few days' worth of beard, and a dirty white t-shirt. I couldn't see what he was wearing below. I didn't want to talk to him, but I also didn't want to be rude. I just wanted to say hi," I replied quickly before turning away. My friend who was behind me asked what was going on. As we walked away, I explained that the man in the truck wasn't the usual one, and that the real owner wasn't on vacation. I admitted that something inside me was telling me that guy was dangerous, and I've always trusted my instincts. We kept walking, talking about anything to distract ourselves. A little while later, we heard the truck's melody again, coming up the road. I didn't think much of it, though we picked up our pace a bit despite the heat. The music stopped, but the sound of the engine kept going. I heard it creeping closer, and out of the corner of my eye I saw the man pass right next to us, driving slowly and staring at us. Then he sped up suddenly and turned left at the intersection. We looked at each other, both nervous, and decided to take the opposite street. To the left there was a small park everyone called Wharf for some reason. One of our friends was there, so we said hi. She walked over to us smiling, and we chatted for a bit to calm down. Suddenly she said, "Did you see the man in the ice cream truck? He was so weird. He wouldn't stop staring at me." The three of us looked at each other, realizing something was wrong. We suggested she walk with us since her house was along the same route. We talked and laughed, trying to forget how unsettled we felt. But again, the ice cream truck music played in the distance. We turned our heads and saw the old truck coming down a private road that branched off the one we were walking on. We tried to ignore it, thinking it was just doing its route. But when it saw us, the truck stopped. The man watched us for several seconds without saying anything, then turned left and disappeared down another street. Not long after, we reached our friend's house. We said goodbye, and she warned us to get home soon. The sun was starting to set, and we still had 30 minutes to go. We kept walking and talking, trying to let the conversation ease the fear, but about 20 minutes later we heard it again. The same ice cream truck melody. It played for a few seconds and then shut off, replaced by the roar of the engine. This time we knew it was behind us. Without thinking, we started running. We ran until we reached my friend's house, gasping, hearts racing. We tried to open the door, but it was locked. There was a note taped to it that said, "I went to the store. Be back soon. Spare key in the garage." She ripped the paper off and we ran to the backyard, hiding under the porch, out of sight from the street. The truck stopped right in front of the house. The engine shut off. The white door opened and the man got out. He knocked on the front door with his knuckles. "Open up," he shouted in a deep voice. No one answered. He tried again. This time he kicked the door hard, then stepped back, frustrated. We watched from our hiding place as he climbed the steps to the back porch. "I know you're in there. Open the door," he yelled. Through the cracks in the floor, I saw something that made my blood run cold. He had a shotgun, and before I could even process it, he fired at the door lock. The noise was deafening. He went into the house. We used that moment to bolt as fast as we could, straight to our other friend's house. As we ran, we heard shouting and another gunshot. I prayed silently that he wasn't aiming at us. With our hearts pounding, we made it to a neighbor's house. We explained what happened, out of breath and shaking. They called the police immediately and secured all the doors. Soon after, we saw patrol cars drive past the house. The officers stopped to make sure we were okay and kept going toward the street behind us. An hour later, they came back with news. They had found the shotgun abandoned, but there was no sign of the man or the truck. When my friend's mother got home, she apologized through tears for leaving the house empty. This happened last year. Now I'm 16. The real ice cream truck owner never got his vehicle back, and the strange man who drove it was never found. Sometimes when I hear the distant music of an ice cream truck in the summer, I feel a shiver run through my body, because you never know who might be behind the wheel. Story 11. When I turned 8 years old, my mom decided to throw me a birthday party. She invited a friend of hers who came with her kids, who I'll call Sally, Billy, and Lily. After the party ended, we all gathered in the living room to spend the night there and put on a horror movie. However, after a little while I got bored, so I suggested we play hide and seek. To my surprise, everyone was just as bored and happily agreed. We decided to use rock, paper, scissors to choose who would be the seeker. The one chosen was Charlie, my older brother. He went to the hallway bathroom to start counting. Before I continue, let me explain what the house was like. When you walked in through the front door, the stairs were immediately to the left. Upstairs, you came to a hallway. On the right was Justin's room, where we were watching the movie. And straight ahead was my sister Charlene's room. If you turned left at the top of the stairs, my room was on the right side, and farther down, turning left again, was my mom's bedroom. At the end of the hallway, if you turned right, there were 3 more doors and another set of stairs. Straight ahead was the linen closet, and to its left was the staircase. When Charlie started counting in the bathroom, the rest of us ran off to hide. I ran downstairs quickly and thought hiding behind the couch would be a good idea. At that moment, one of my uncle's friends, Scott, was sleeping on the couch, completely drunk. We didn't think much of it, so we kept playing. I remember Lily came downstairs looking for a hiding spot too, and for some reason she decided to hide with me behind the couch. I didn't mind. Actually, it seemed perfect. Oh, and I forgot to mention, we were playing hide and seek in the dark, which, without knowing it, was going to make everything much more disturbing. Charlie was pretty fast at finding everyone else. I was still hiding with Lily when all of a sudden Scott started laughing loudly and pointed up at the ceiling. Lily noticed because she put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, friend. Everything will be okay. I'm with you." Her voice sounded strange, like it was coming from very far away, muffled. I looked at her and asked what was wrong with her voice. That's when I noticed her hand. It was bony, pale, and ice cold. I felt a chill and turned to look at her directly. But what I saw wasn't Lily. What was in front of me was something impossible. A creature with eyes, ears, and a mouth that were ridiculously large, set into a small, deformed face with twisted features. I screamed so loudly I felt the sound bounce through the whole house. Without thinking, I jumped over the couch and ran as fast as I could. Charlie must have heard me because he appeared just in time to see me sprinting up the stairs. That thing was chasing me. I could feel its footsteps behind me. I ran into Justin's room and slammed the door shut. Everyone came back immediately, alarmed, and I told them what I had seen. But then Lily, confused, said she had never been in the living room. She insisted she had been hiding with Charlene in the dining room under the table. A tense silence filled the room. Suddenly, Justin went pale and told everyone to look at my back. I turned around and saw red stains on my shirt. Charlie lifted the fabric, and everyone went quiet. I had 4 big scratches running across my back. At first, I hadn't felt anything. No pain, no blood. But in that moment, it started burning, and I started crying from fear. Charlene asked if I wanted to keep playing, but no way. I told them to keep going without me. Justin, worried, offered to stay with me. We were going to go to the bathroom to clean the wounds, but when we opened the bedroom door, he stopped short. The others were already hiding, so we weren't expecting to see anyone. That's when Justin said quietly, "There's someone peeking out from Charlie's room." We moved slowly into the hallway, and I saw a white head slide back into the room. It almost looked like it was glowing. The hallway light, the one outside the bathroom, was on, which let us see better. According to Justin, that thing had no features. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just a smooth, pale, human-shaped form. When I saw it, I screamed again and ran back into the bedroom. The others, terrified, came running right away. Justin explained what we had seen and asked Charlie if it had been him, but Charlie denied being in his room at any point. At that moment, we all decided to stay together in one room. We turned on the lights, put on a movie, and tried to stay awake until exhaustion got the best of us. The only time we left was when my sister took me to the bathroom to clean the blood. It was really hard for me to sleep that night. The pain from the scratches was unbearable, but eventually I passed out. The next morning, my sister took me to the bathroom again to check if the cuts were still bleeding. And then we saw something that left us frozen. There was nothing there anymore. The wounds had completely disappeared. I never found out what it was I saw that night. All I know is I'm glad I don't live in that house anymore. We moved before I started 5th grade, and since then the house has stayed empty. I have no idea what that thing was, and honestly, I'd rather never know. Story 12. I've known Jack for as long as I can remember. We've been best friends since we were kids, inseparable. Over the years, we had countless sleepovers at his house or mine. Sometimes it was because my parents weren't around, other times because he needed help with school, or simply because we wanted to hang out. There were 1,000 different reasons. Jack and his family moved into their current house when his grandmother passed away a few years ago. It was a pretty big house for being only one story, with lots of rooms and extra spaces, like old houses usually have. When you walked in through the front door, you came to a long hallway, about 20 to 23 feet, with several doors along the sides. At the end on the left was the main living room, which everyone called the den. It was a large space connected to the dining room and the kitchen. On the right side of the hallway, there was a door that led to a guest room, although at the time it was being used as a storage room. Jack had been living there for a while, and more than once he told me he felt weird things in that house. The feeling that someone was watching him, or hearing strange noises with no explanation. I remember one time we were all at his mother's office right across from the house. It was a pretty busy day, but I needed to use the bathroom. I asked his mom if I could use the one in the house, and she handed me the keys with a smile. Even though it was just across the street, I really didn't like the idea of going alone. I'd always been kind of a nervous kid, easily scared. Still, I crossed over, unlocked the house, and went to the bathroom. While I was in there, the fan suddenly turned on by itself. The sound made me jump. I finished as fast as I could and left the house without looking back. Years passed, and around 2014 I started going over more often. Maybe out of curiosity, I wanted to see if weird things really happened like Jack said they did. And I have to say, yes, I saw them. Between 2014 and the end of 2015, I witnessed enough to never want to go back again. It all started in mid-2014. Jack and I were 12, and as you'd expect, we did dumb kid stuff. We stayed up really late, if we slept at all, even after his mom told us to shut everything off. We almost always slept in the den because the recliners were way more comfortable than the beds. It was our routine. Jack would fall asleep first, and I'd stay awake, staring at the ceiling or playing on my phone until I finally passed out. From the recliners, you could see the entire living room, the dining room, and part of the kitchen. And beyond that, a room full of old dolls that they used as storage. At night, when everything was completely dark, that view was terrifying, I remember one night in particular. I was lying there trying to fall asleep while Jack was already snoring a few feet away from me. I felt a cold draft, a light breeze but icy. I pulled the blanket over me, thinking it was just a normal draft. But then I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. A whisper so soft I could barely make it out sounded right next to my ear. I stayed completely still, holding my breath. I barely slept at all that night. After that, things started happening again and again. Shadows, noises, faint voices. It got to a point where I got used to it, even though I still couldn't explain it. But nothing had prepared me for what happened in 2015. That night, Jack and I were playing Halo 4 on his Xbox 360. At some point, we decided to go to the kitchen to grab some sodas. We closed his bedroom door when we left, and when we came back, the door was wide open. We didn't think much of it. We went back to playing for a couple more hours, and then we decided to go to sleep. His bed was big, so each of us lay down on one end. 30 minutes later, Jack was already sleeping deeply. I was just about to close my eyes when I heard a soft creak, like hinges. I looked toward the door, and again it was wide open. That door opened onto the dark hallway of the house, a hallway that at night looked like a black hole. I couldn't stand looking at it, so I got up and closed it. But barely 10 minutes later, the sound came back. The door was opening on its own. I froze. The squeak of the hinges, the slow movement of the wood, and the cold air coming in from the hallway. I didn't sleep at all that night. The door moved over and over again, opening and closing with that sharp sound that felt like it was coming from deep inside the house. The next morning, as soon as the sun came up, I called my mom to come pick me up. I didn't want to spend another minute there. Since then, I learned something. You don't mess around with the paranormal. No matter how curious you are, there are things that can give you nightmares for years. I learned that the hard way, and I hope you don't have to. Story 13. My name is Harvey, and I'm from the United Kingdom. This story happened about 6 years ago, when I was 11 years old. It all started when my parents and I were staying at a hotel called Rason, where we were going to spend 5 days. We were on vacation at Disneyland Paris from July 17th to the 21st. It was a sunny day and we were relaxing in the hotel lobby. My parents and I had found a comfortable couch, and a little while later my new friend Paige and her mother joined us. Paige was a really nice girl, a little older than me, but we got along well. Our families started talking about normal things, what activities to do, which parks to go to, how to make the most of the trip. Paige showed us a picture she had taken with Mickey Mouse, and I showed her mine too. Everything felt happy and relaxed. Then I asked my parents if we could go out into the garden for a while. They said yes, so Paige and I stood up and headed toward the door. Right as I was about to open it, I saw a hotel staff member walking toward us. Paige and I looked at him at the same time, wondering why he was coming in our direction. The man looked like he was in his 20s. He had dark brown hair, blue eyes, and he was wearing a white shirt with a black tie, a blue vest, black pants, and black shoes. He was also tall and thin with a blank expression. He stopped right in front of us while he cleaned a glass window. Paige and I smiled politely, and he just kept going, continuing his task. When we went out into the garden, Paige told me, "That was pretty weird." She let out a nervous little laugh, and I told her maybe that man would get in trouble if he kept bothering guests. She nodded, and we changed the subject, talking about how fun the trip had been and everything we had seen at Disney. After a few minutes, we decided to peek back inside to see if the man had left, but he hadn't. He was still there, standing by the window, staring straight at us. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it, but no. He was there, motionless, watching us with no expression at all. His stare was empty but intense. Several seconds passed, which felt like whole minutes, and he didn't take his eyes off us. We tried to ignore him by looking away, but when we looked back, he was still there. I felt my pulse speed up. That sense of danger rose from my stomach up into my throat. Finally, my defensive instincts kicked in and I yelled at him, "What are you looking at?" The man smiled with a disturbing smirk. Then he raised his hand and waved at us slowly, like he was mocking us. After that, he turned around and walked away quickly, like he didn't want to be seen. Scared, Paige and I ran to the front desk to tell them what had happened. We described the man in detail, his uniform, his face, everything. But the front desk staff looked at each other, confused. They told us there was no one matching that description working there. We asked them to call the police, and they did. The officers arrived and searched the place, but they didn't find anyone. We never found out who that man was or how he had gotten there. All I know is that from that day on, the gardens of the Horizon Hotel stopped feeling so peaceful to me. Story 14. I used to work at a restaurant with a guy named Matt, and we shared shifts for about 2 months until I found a new job. It was a better job, with better hours and pay. Still, Matt was the only thing I missed about my old job. He was my closest friend there. He had a charming, talkative personality. He was the kind of person you could talk to for hours without getting bored. To give you an idea, I'm a tall girl. I'm about 5 feet 11 inches. Matt, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Short, skinny, and Puerto Rican. I'd say he was about 5 feet 2 inches, which made the height difference between us very obvious. On top of that, there was a small age difference. He was 19 and I was 21. Because of that, it never crossed my mind that he might be interested in me. I don't really believe in the concept of the friend zone, but for me, Matt was simply that. A friend. Nothing more. A month after I left the restaurant, Matt texted me. He said he'd love it if we went out to dinner sometime. I was really happy to hear from him because I had missed him a lot. We picked a day and time that worked for both of us. Since it was Houston, traffic got the best of me, and I arrived 45 minutes late. We went to dinner at an Olive Garden. I think that's where it was. Dinner was nice. We talked about everything, caught up, and he told me how things had been going since I left the restaurant. It was a really pleasant evening. When it was time to pay, he insisted on covering the bill, even though I tried to argue. Then smiling, he said, "Do you want to see the new Avengers movie?" I loved those movies, so I agreed right away. We went to one of those theaters where you can watch the movie while having a drink. I don't know why, but he got into my car, and I ended up being the one to drive us there. The movie was great, and I was totally focused. But during one of the sad scenes when Thor almost dies, I felt Matt take my hand. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. After a minute, it hit me. To him, this was a date. To me, it wasn't. I didn't return the gesture. My hand just stayed there, completely still, while he kept holding it. I'm sure he must have thought I was the worst handholder in the world. I just froze, not knowing how to react. From that moment on, I couldn't focus on the movie anymore. All I could think about was his hand holding mine, and how I could pull away without making everything even more awkward. I came up with a plan. Pretend I needed to use the bathroom. So I did. I excused myself, went to the restroom, took a minute to breathe and came back. When I returned, I kept my hands in my lap so he wouldn't reach for them again, but it didn't work. This time he took my hand directly in my lap, and there we were, fingers intertwined with a silence so thick it made me want to disappear. Finally, the movie ended. I felt relieved. At least he hadn't tried to kiss me during the movie, so I figured everything would end peacefully. We walked to the parking lot without any issues, but then I remembered something. We had come in my car and I had to take him back to the restaurant where we'd met up. The drive back was normal. We talked about how good the movie had been, and it seemed like things were going back to normal. When we got to Olive Garden, I said, "Well, that was fun, right?" "See you later." But he didn't move. He just sat there looking at me. Before I could ask what was wrong, he leaned toward me and tried to kiss me. It was so unexpected that it felt like time stopped. I wasn't interested, and everything got uncomfortable in a matter of seconds. All I managed to say, my voice shaking, was, "I don't want to." I felt guilty and embarrassed. He had clearly read the situation in a completely different way. Even in the darkness inside the car, I could see the disappointment on his face. "Oh, okay," he said with a forced smile. He tried to open the door, but it got stuck, which made everything even more uncomfortable. Finally, he managed to open it, and before getting out, he muttered, "It was fun. See you later." It was nice of him to say that, even if it wasn't entirely true. Later, thinking about everything, I realized how naive I had been. He invited me to dinner and then to a movie. The classic setup for a romantic date. How did I not see it coming? But honestly, I'll probably fall into an accidental date again in the future. At least now I know how to recognize it. 2 years later, Matt got married, and every now and then when I pass through Houston, we meet up for coffee or a beer. We never brought up that night again. It's as if it never happened. He's still a good guy, and if there's anything I learned from all of this, it's that for the guys out there, sometimes there are girls like me, completely clueless. So if you want to ask someone out, and say it clearly. Do you want to go on a date with me? That way we'll all know what we're dealing with. Story 15. It might sound cliche, but I've always been a skeptical person when it comes to ghosts or anything supernatural. And it's important for you to know that, because what I experienced that time was so real, so impossible to explain, that for the first time in my life I couldn't blame the wind or exhaustion or my imagination. I was 12 years old when it happened. That night I was going to have a sleepover at my best friend's house, who I'll call Kelly for this story. It was a Friday night, and as always, we were really excited. Kelly lived in a big house, but every time we had a sleepover, we slept in the downstairs living room. Let me describe the place because it'll matter later. The living room was huge. On one side there were 2 big couches, a TV, and a pool table. On the other side, about 20 feet away, there was a shelving unit with glass display cabinets. There wasn't much inside, just old files from her dad's work. A few weeks earlier, I had noticed they also kept some interesting books there, but Kelly told me those cabinets were always locked since her dad kept important documents in there. After we watched a couple of movies and talked for a while, midnight came. I went upstairs to the bathroom to brush my teeth while Kelly set up the blankets on the couches. While I was brushing, I looked in the mirror, and through the reflection I could see the glass shower behind me. That's when I noticed it. A shadow. It wasn't just any shadow. It was darker than everything else in the room. And what was most unsettling, its shape was the silhouette of a small child. I couldn't make out any features, but its outline was clear, unmistakable. I spun around quickly, and there was no one there. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it had to be my imagination. I looked back at the mirror. Nothing. Everything normal. I took out my contact lenses, looked up again, and it was there again, in the same spot, still watching me from the reflection. I ran downstairs in a panic and told Kelly what I had seen. I won't lie, I started crying as I talked. I was trying not to sound dramatic, but it had felt way too real. I must have made a lot of noise because Kelly's mom came running downstairs to see what was going on. Her face was calm, but her expression felt distant, like she already knew what we were talking about. "In the shower?" she asked. I nodded, unable to say a word. "Did it look like a little boy?" she added. Kelly and I both said yes at the same time. I felt my blood turn to ice. Then Kelly's mom said, in a calm but emotionless voice, "I've seen him before too. Don't worry." And just like that, she went back upstairs as quickly as she had come down. That night, of course, I couldn't sleep well. I think I finally fell asleep around 2 in the morning. But an hour later, around 3, a loud thud woke me up, like something had fallen right next to my head. I looked around, but I didn't see anything. I decided to ignore it and go back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up before Kelly. When I looked down at the floor right next to my head, I saw a huge photo album, wide open. I sat up slowly and looked toward the shelving unit. The glass cabinets were open, so they weren't always locked like Kelly had said. The album was open to a page with just one photograph. In it there was a small boy smiling, sitting on a swing. When we went downstairs for breakfast, I told Kelly's mom everything. She took the album, looked at it, and her face turned completely pale. "Who is that?" I asked, pointing at the photo. She took a deep breath, trembling a little, and answered, "That's my brother. He died when he was 6 years old." From that day on, I never fully doubted the supernatural again. And even though I try to find a logical explanation, every time I think about that night, I see his silhouette in the mirror again.